You are 70 years old. $47 in your purse. One suitcase. A pocket watch that weighs more than it should. And the barn at the end of this driveway is the only thing your children didn't want. Your son took the house. Your daughter took the car. Between them, they emptied a bank account you and your husband had filled across 50 years of marriage. And when there was nothing left worth fighting for, they slid one last paper across the table and laughed. A farm in Kentucky. $11,000 in back taxes. A roof half caved in. Take it, Mom. We don't want it. You took it. What your children didn't know, what nobody knew, was that your father had spent his entire life protecting this place. He had locked that barn for over 60 years. He had never let you inside. Not once. And on the back of the pocket watch in your hand, scratched by his own thumb, were 4 numbers. By the end of this year, the children who laughed at this farm would file a lawsuit to take it back. They would lose everything trying. 6 weeks ago, you buried your husband. Bernie, 50 years of marriage. The man who left grocery lists on the counter in pencil because he didn't trust pens. The man who made coffee at 5 in the morning because he liked the quiet. The man who sat in his recliner one Tuesday afternoon in October with the television still on and the coffee still warm and just stopped. You found him at 4:15. You sat on the arm of the recliner for a long time. You didn't call anyone. Not yet. Because once you called, it became real. And you wanted 3 more minutes before it became real. Then you called. The funeral was tasteful. Russell made sure of that. Your son, 47 years old. He runs the insurance agency Bernie built. He wore a charcoal suit and shook 300 hands and said all the right things. Lorraine stood beside him in pearls. Your daughter, 44, dabbing her eyes with a tissue she never actually used. You stood at the casket. Your feet ached, your chest felt hollow. But you stood, because that is what women like you do. You stand. 2 weeks after the funeral, Russell called a family meeting. Family meeting. He said those exact words, like you were planning a Thanksgiving menu, like you were discussing where to put the Christmas tree. You drove to his house, the house you and Bernie helped him buy 15 years ago. You sat at his dining room table, across from your 2 children. Lorraine had a folder. Russell had a legal pad. They had been busy. Mom, we need to talk about Dad's estate. You nodded. You expected this. Lorraine opened the folder. Documents fanned across the table like cards in a magic trick. Deeds, account statements, insurance forms. The house, Russell said. Dad put my name on the deed 12 years ago, after his first heart episode. Estate planning. Estate planning. So technically, the house is mine. You looked at him. The boy you read bedtime stories to. The boy whose fevers you sat up with. The boy who had Bernie's jaw and your eyes. You want me to leave? Not leave, Mom. Transition. Lorraine found a beautiful place. Sunrise Gardens. They have a memory care wing if you ever need. I'm 70. Mom, I'm 70, Russell, not 85. Lorraine jumped in. Smooth. Practiced. Mom, nobody's saying you can't take care of yourself. We just think it would be easier. Safer. And the bank accounts? A glance between them. The kind of glance you saw when they were children, and they had broken something and were deciding who would lie about it first. We moved the funds into a trust, Russell said. For estate management, Lorraine and I are co-trustees. You sat very still. 50 years of marriage. Every dollar. Every vacation you skipped. Every dress you didn't buy. Every late night you spent doing Bernie's books for the agency while he built the business. Every Christmas where you put the kids' presents on the tree first and yours last. Divided. in an afternoon. And the car? Lorraine's going to take it. You don't drive much anymore. I drive every day. You wanted to say it. You didn't. Is there anything left? Russell flipped a page on his legal pad. He didn't look at you. There's Grandpa Silas's farm. Lorraine almost laughed. She caught herself. Almost. In Kentucky, Dad always said it was worthless. The county sent letters about back taxes a few years ago. We didn't respond. The property's assessed at less than the taxes owed. How much? $11,000. $11,000 on a piece of land nobody wanted. A farmhouse, rotting in a county nobody had heard of. A barn your father had locked your entire childhood and never explained. I'll take it. Russell blinked. Take what? The farm. I'll take the farm. Lorraine leaned forward. Mom, there's nothing there. The house is falling apart. There's no water. No. You said it's mine. My father left it to me. Not to Bernie. Not to a trust. To me. It's worthless. Then you won't mind? Neither of them argued. Why would they? They had everything that mattered. You stayed in Russell's guest bedroom for 3 weeks. They made you feel it every day. His wife sighed when you used the kitchen. The grandchildren were told to keep it down because Grandma needed rest, which really meant Grandma was in the way. Brochures appeared on the nightstand. Sunrise Gardens, Peaceful Meadows, Twilight Acres, places with names designed to make you forget you were being put away. On the 22nd night, you sat on the edge of the bed. You couldn't sleep. You hadn't slept in a week. You opened the top drawer of the dresser. Inside was the only thing you had brought from your real home. The thing you had carried in your handbag through the funeral and the meetings and the meals you couldn't taste. A brass pocket watch, your father's. He had pressed it into your hand 22 years ago. You were 48. He was dying of emphysema in a hospital bed in Lexington, his lungs giving out a little more with every breath. He couldn't say much, but he held your wrist with what was left of his strength and pressed the watch against your palm and rasped, "Keep this. You'll know when you need it." You hadn't known what he meant. You still didn't. You turned the watch over in your hand. 4 numbers, scratched into the brass with the tip of a knife, steady, deliberate. Each digit pressed deep enough that you could feel them with your thumb in the dark. You had always thought it was a date, a birthday, an anniversary, but the numbers didn't match anything. Not your birthday, not his, not your mother's, not the year of anything you could remember. You ran your thumb across them. Your hands stayed steady. You had done your crying already, into a pillow, at 3 in the morning, when nobody could hear. You were done with that now. The next morning, you packed your suitcase. 1 suitcase, everything you owned in the world, 2 sweaters, 3 blouses, a toothbrush, a photograph of Bernie at the beach in 1979, because that was the photograph where he looked the most like himself. You walked downstairs. Russell was in the kitchen, reading the paper. "I'm leaving today." He looked up. "Where?" "Kentucky." He set the paper down. "Mom, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. That farm is uninhabitable. Then I will make it habitable. You don't have a car. I have legs. Mom?" "Russell." You looked at him, the way you used to look at him when he was 8 and lying about the cookie jar. "I am going to Kentucky. I am going to my father's farm, and you are not going to stop me." He didn't. He could have. He could have called Lorraine. He could have invented a reason. But somewhere underneath the suit and the legal pad and the family meeting, there was still a boy who knew that tone in his mother's voice. You called a cab to the bus station. He didn't drive you. The Greyhound bus smelled like diesel and old upholstery. You sat by the window. You watched Ohio turn into Kentucky, the flat suburbs giving way to rolling hills, the trees gone bare for winter, the sky low and grey and pressing down. You ate a granola bar from your purse. You drank from a water bottle. You held the pocket watch in your lap and ran your thumb across the 4 numbers like a rosary. The bus dropped you at a gas station on the edge of a town called Millbrook. The attendant looked at you over his counter, a man in his 60s with a feed cap and a face like cracked leather. "Help you, ma'am?" "I'm looking for the old Bramwell farm." He scratched his chin. "Bramwell, that's Silas's place, out on County Road 9. "That's right. Nobody's been out there in 20 years. "I know." He looked at your suitcase, then at your shoes, then at your hands. "You family?" "I'm his daughter." He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, slow. "4 miles east," he said. "Stay on the right side of the road. There's no shoulder." "Thank you." "Ma'am." He paused. "Welcome home." You almost broke right there, in a gas station, in front of a stranger, because nobody had said welcome home to you in 6 weeks. Not your son, not your daughter, not anyone. A stranger had to do it. You picked up your suitcase. You walked out the door. 4 miles is not a long way. When you are 40, when you are 70, with a suitcase that bumps your leg every step, and a wind cutting across an open field with nothing to stop it, 4 miles is a pilgrimage. You stopped twice. Once to switch the suitcase to your other hand. Once because your back wouldn't let you keep walking unless you sat on a milepost for 5 minutes. A truck slowed beside you. A heavy-set woman in a feed cap rolled down the window. "You need a ride, hun? I'm almost there." "Where's there?" "The Bramwell farm." The woman's eyebrows climbed. "That old place. You sure?" "I'm sure." She studied you, then nodded, then drove on. You walked. The driveway was barely visible. Saplings had pushed through the gravel. Weeds as tall as your knee. A mailbox on a leaning post with the name Bramwell still visible on the side in flaking paint. You turned in, and there it was. The house. 2 stories. Wooden. White once. Now, mostly bare wood. The paint peeled down like skin. The porch sagged on the left, where the supports had rotted. An upstairs window was broken. A square of cardboard had been taped over it from the inside decades ago by someone who had given up. Behind the house, the barn. Red once. Now, a weathered grey. The roof had caved in on the south side. A rusted padlock hung on the main door. Heavy. Industrial. The kind you put on a barn when you mean it. You set your suitcase down at the end of the driveway. You stood there. For a long time. $11,000 in back taxes. A house that might not survive the winter. A barn your father had kept locked your entire life. And $47 in your purse. You picked up the suitcase. You walked to the front door. It was unlocked. It had always been unlocked. Your father never locked the house. Just the barn. Inside, dust covered everything. 22 years of it. Soft as fur on every surface. The air smelled stale. Trapped. Like a closed jar that hadn't been opened since before you had grandchildren. You set the suitcase down in the front hallway. You walked through the rooms. The kitchen still had dishes in the cabinets. Plates with a blue flower pattern. You remembered those plates from when you were a child. You used to eat oatmeal off them on Saturday mornings while your father sat across from you, reading the paper, never speaking, just present. The living room had his chair, a worn leather recliner positioned by the window, where he could see the barn. Of course it faced the barn. You went upstairs. The boards groaned under your weight. The bedroom at the end of the hall was your father's. The bed was made, 22 years ago. He had made his bed on the day he left for the hospital and never came back. The quilt your mother stitched before you were born was folded at the foot, the seams coming apart in places, but still warm-looking, still solid. You sat on the edge of the bed. You said, out loud, to the empty room, "I'm here, Daddy." The house didn't answer. Of course it didn't. That first night, you slept on a bare mattress. You didn't have sheets. You wrapped yourself in your mother's quilt. The mattress smelled like dust and old wool. The wind moved through the gaps in the window frame, and the house creaked the way old houses creak when they are settling back into being lived in. You woke at dawn. Birds, real birds, close and loud. Not the muffled city sounds you had lived with for 50 years. A whole choir of them, in the bare trees outside the window, singing into the cold air like something was about to begin. You lay there for a long time, listening. Then you got up, and you started cleaning. You worked for 3 days. You swept every floor. You wiped every surface with a rag and water from a thermos because the well wasn't running. You scraped mold from the bathroom tiles with a butter knife. You carried armloads of dead leaves and animal nests out of the house and made a burn pile behind the porch. You found canned goods in the cellar, beans, tomatoes, jars of preserved peaches with hand-lettered labels in your father's writing. Some were too old. You threw those out. Some were still good. Mason jars, sealed tight. Your father's work, decades after he was gone. You ate cold beans out of a can on the second night, sitting at the kitchen table, by candlelight, because you didn't have electricity yet. It was the best meal you had eaten in 6 weeks. On the third morning, a truck came up the driveway. You stepped out onto the porch. A man got out, tall, broad-shouldered, white hair cropped short, a canvas jacket, boots caked with dried mud. "Morning, ma'am." "Morning." He stayed by his truck. He didn't come closer. "Saw smoke from your burn pile yesterday. Thought I'd come check." "I'm alive." His eyes warmed, just slightly. "I see that." "Eleanor Halloran." "Cyrus Easton. I live 2 miles down, past the bend." "You knew my father?" He nodded. Slowly. "Silas. Yeah, we talked some. He came into town for supplies, and we'd sit on the bench outside the post office. Quiet man." "That sounds like him." Cyrus looked past you, at the house, at the barn. "Water shut off?" "Yes." "Electric too?" "Yes." "You got money for the deposits?" You hesitated. He saw it. "County wants 200 for the water turn-on, 150 for electric. Maybe more." You did the math in your head. You had $43 left, because the bus had been 37, and you had bought beans and bread at the gas station. You had $11,000 in back taxes hanging over the deed, and winter was coming. You did not let your face show any of this. Cyrus didn't push. "I'll let you settle in," he said. "If you need anything, my mailbox is on the road. Number 886. Just leave a note." "Thank you." He got back in his truck. He drove away. That afternoon, you walked to the mailbox. Habit. You had checked the mail every day of your married life. You did not expect anything. You opened the door. There was an envelope inside. White. Plain. No address. No stamp. Just your name written across the front in shaky handwriting. Eleanor. You opened it. Inside were $300 bills and a note. Silas was a good neighbor. Welcome home. That was all. No signature. You stood at the mailbox for a long time, holding the money, reading the note again, and again. Welcome home. Twice in 3 days. From strangers. Your own children couldn't manage it once. You called the county that afternoon. From Cyrus's phone. He let you use it without a word, like it was the most normal thing in the world for a 70-year-old woman to walk a mile down the road to use a stranger's landline. The water came on the next morning. The electricity came on the day after. By the end of the first week, the house was livable. Not pretty, not comfortable, but livable. The water ran brown for 20 minutes, and then it cleared. The lights worked in every room except the upstairs bathroom. You bought a small bag of groceries at the hardware store in town, which also sold a tiny selection of food at marked-up prices because there was nowhere else closer than 15 miles. You cooked your first hot meal on the old gas stove. Beans and rice, salt, a can of tomatoes. You sat at the kitchen table to eat it, by the window, and you looked at the barn. The barn. Your father had never let you inside. Not once in your entire childhood. That's my workshop, Eleanor. Nothing in there for little girls. You were 12 when you tried to peek through a gap in the siding. He caught you. He raised his voice. The only time he ever raised his voice at you. You remembered the way his face changed. Not angry. Frightened. He was frightened. You never tried again. Now you were 70, and he had been gone for 22 years. And the barn sat there with its rusted padlock like a question nobody had ever answered. You put your fork down. You went to the kitchen drawer. You pulled out the pocket watch. You turned it over in your hand. 4 numbers, scratched into the brass. You'll know when you need it. You hadn't known. For 22 years, you hadn't known. But sitting in the kitchen of your father's empty house, with the wind moving through the trees outside and the barn standing silent in the late afternoon light, you began to wonder. What if it wasn't a date? What if your father, the quiet man who had locked that barn for over 60 years and never once let his daughter inside, had given you the answer in the only way he knew how? A combination for something he wanted you to find. When you needed it, you did not sleep well that night. You lay in your father's bed, with your mother's quilt, and the pocket watch on the nightstand, and you stared at the ceiling, and your mind would not stop running. You thought about Bernie, about 50 years of marriage, and how much of it had been good. You thought about Russell, about the boy he used to be, about when he had stopped being that boy. You thought about Lorraine, about her smile at the dining room table, the little half-laugh when she said Grandpa Silas's farm, like it was a joke, like you were a joke. You thought about your father, the man who locked the barn, the man who scratched 4 numbers into a watch and pressed it into your hand from a hospital bed and said, "You'll know." You got out of bed at 3 in the morning. You put on your coat over your nightgown. You walked downstairs. You pulled the kitchen drawer open. You took out a claw hammer. You walked outside. The night was cold and clear. The stars overhead were bright. In a way you had forgotten stars could be bright. Whole rivers of them. You could see your breath. You could hear your own heartbeat. You walked to the barn. You stood in front of the padlock. You raised the hammer. You wedged the claw end behind the hasp. You pulled. The screws held for a moment. Then they tore free from the rotting wood with a sound like a tooth coming out. The padlock clattered to the ground. The door swung open. 6 inches. You stood in the doorway. You did not go in. You couldn't see anything inside. Just a shape of darker dark. A smell of old hay and old wood and something else. Something you couldn't name. A faint sweetness underneath. A chemical edge. You whispered to your father. You didn't even mean to. "What did you do, Daddy?" The barn didn't answer. You closed the door, half closed it. The padlock was on the ground, and the hasp was hanging by a splinter. It didn't matter. The barn had been locked for 60 years, and now it wasn't. You went back inside the house. You did not sleep. In the morning, you went back. In the daylight, you opened the door wide. The sun came in at a hard slant through the cave-in on the south side of the roof. Dust hung in the air like a held breath. You stepped inside, carefully, testing each footfall. Collapsed beams in a tangle along the south wall. Old hay covering most of the floor. Tools hanging on pegboard, rusted to the point of being sculptures rather than tools. A workbench against the far wall, its surface buried under decades of debris. You walked the perimeter slowly, reading it, learning it. You kicked aside some hay near the entrance. You looked down. Concrete. Not dirt, not packed earth, not wooden planks. Concrete. Smooth. Poured. Extending wall to wall as far as you could kick the hay aside. You stood very still. Barns do not have concrete floors, not unless someone is trying to keep something underneath from being found. You walked the floor, slowly, kicking hay aside as you went. The concrete was consistent. No cracks, no seams. Whoever had poured it had known what they were doing. You reached the northeast corner. The surface was slightly different, smoother, newer maybe, though still decades old. You stamped your foot. The sound was different, hollow. You knelt. You pressed your ear to the cold concrete. You knocked with your knuckles. The sound came back, deep, resonant, like there was a room. Underneath, you sat back on your heels, your knees aching, your chest tight, your hands trembling, not from fear, from something bigger than fear. You pulled the pocket watch out of your coat pocket. You turned it over. The 4 numbers caught the morning light, steady, patient, waiting for you, as they had been waiting for 60 years, as your father had been waiting for you, from a hospital bed in Lexington, from a coffin in the ground, from the only place he had left to wait from. You'll know when you need it. You closed your hand around the watch. You whispered, "I'm sorry it took me so long, Daddy." The barn was silent. Outside, somewhere in the bare trees, a bird called. Once, sharp and clear, you stood up. You brushed the dust from your knees. You walked back to the house. You needed tools. You needed help. You needed somebody you could trust. And there was only one person in the whole state of Kentucky who had said welcome home to you and meant it. You picked up the pen on the kitchen counter. You wrote a note on the back of an envelope. "Cyrus, I need to ask you for something. It's not small. Come by when you can. Eleanor." You walked the mile down the road in the cold morning air. You put the note in the mailbox at number 886. You walked back. You sat on the porch. You waited. The wind moved through the tall grass. The sun climbed. Somewhere across the fields, a dog barked. And underneath the barn, 60 years of silence kept waiting too. Whatever your father had buried, whatever he had spent his whole life protecting, whatever he had been trying to give you, in the only way a quiet man knows how. You didn't know yet, but you were going to. Cyrus came at noon. He didn't knock. He just stood at the bottom of the porch steps with his hands in his jacket pockets and waited until you looked up from the rocking chair and saw him there. You wrote a note. I did. You said it's not small. It's not. He nodded. Slowly, the way men of a certain generation nod when they are deciding whether to take you seriously. All right. That was all he said. All right. 2 words, and something inside you loosened. because nobody had said all right to you in months, not without conditions, not without a brochure, not without a folder spread across a dining room table. You stood up. I want to show you something. Okay. I need you to promise you won't tell anyone. He looked at you for a long moment. The wind moved through the tall grass behind him. Somewhere across the fields, a tractor was running. Eleanor? Yes. I don't have anyone to tell. You took him to the barn. You didn't say anything on the walk over. He didn't ask. You opened the door. You pointed at the floor. You kicked the hay aside in the northeast corner and you stamped your foot. The hollow sound came back. Cyrus knelt. He pressed his ear to the concrete. He knocked. He knocked again, 2 feet to the left. He knocked again. He stood up. He brushed off his knees. How long has this been here? My father poured it. I don't know when. He never let you in here? Never. Cyrus walked the perimeter, slow, reading it. He stopped at the workbench. He ran his hand along the edge. This is finished work, Eleanor. Whoever poured this floor knew what they were doing. 8 inches, maybe more. Can we break through it? Not with a hammer, not in this lifetime. Then how? He looked at you. You looked at him. I have a jackhammer. You have a jackhammer. I do. Why does a man 2 miles down the road have a jackhammer? I was a mining engineer for 36 years, Eleanor. I have a jackhammer. I have a generator. I have a compressor. I have things you wouldn't believe I have. You laughed. You didn't mean to. It surprised you. The sound of your own laugh. You hadn't heard it in a long time. It came out small and rusty, like a hinge that hadn't been used. Cyrus didn't laugh, but he gave a small nod, as if the laugh had earned something from him. Tomorrow, he said, 6 in the morning, I'll bring everything. I can't pay you. I didn't ask. Cyrus, Eleanor, why are you helping me? He looked at the barn, then at the house, then at the field beyond, where the grass was going gold in the late autumn light. Because your father helped me once, about 30 years ago. I had a son. He was 19. He was sick, the kind of sick that needed money we didn't have. Your father loaned me $1,200 and never asked for it back. I paid him anyway. 6 years later, he took the money and he said, "Good. Now don't tell anyone." That was it. That was the whole conversation. You couldn't speak. My son lived, Eleanor. He's 51 years old now. He has 3 kids. He has a life. You looked at the barn. He never told me, you said. He wouldn't have. No, he wouldn't have. Cyrus turned for the door. 6 in the morning, he said. 6. He arrived at 5:45. You had coffee ready in a percolator. The smell of it filled the house. You sat on the porch in the cold dawn light, and you drank it without speaking. The sky was pale gray. The fields were silver with frost. Somewhere a rooster was calling, even though there were no roosters within 5 miles, and you wondered for a moment whether you were imagining it. Cyrus set his mug on the railing. Let's go see that floor. The jackhammer was tremendous. The noise filled the barn, filled the morning, probably filled 5 miles in every direction. Dust came up in clouds. Concrete chips flew. You tied a rag over your nose and mouth. You stood back. You watched. Cyrus worked methodically, the way a man works when he has done a thing so many times he doesn't need to think about it. He drove the chisel point into the concrete near the northeast corner. He worked outward in a square. 40 minutes. 50. The chisel hit something different. A clang. Sharp. Metallic. Cutting through the roar of the hammer like a bell. Cyrus killed the compressor. The silence felt enormous. He knelt. He brushed concrete debris away with his gloved hands. You came closer. Beneath the broken concrete, dull grey steel. A plate, set into a steel frame, bolted to a poured foundation underneath the barn floor. Eleanor, yes. This is a hatch. Yes. This is military-grade steel. Yes. Your father didn't pour a floor. He built a vault. You stood very still, your hands at your sides, your mouth slightly open. Your father, the quiet man who fixed his own tractor, who patched his own boots, who ate beans out of a jar and drove the same truck for 30 years, had built a vault. Cyrus cleared more concrete. The full outline of the hatch came into view. 4 feet square, a heavy-duty combination lock secured a latch on the near side. Brass, solid, older than you were. You pulled the pocket watch from your coat pocket. You knelt beside the hatch. Your hands were trembling. You turned the watch over. You read the 4 numbers. You dialed them in. Left to the first. Right to the second. Left to the third. Right to the fourth. The lock clicked open. Cyrus didn't move. You didn't move. The wind moved through the open barn doors. Somewhere the dog barked again. Somewhere a truck passed on the road. Life went on. Life kept going. As if nothing had just happened. As if a 70-year-old woman had not just opened a door her father had sealed before she was old enough to drive. You whispered. Help me lift it. The hatch was heavy. The hinges groaned. They had been frozen for 60 years. They protested. They gave way slowly. The lid swung up and back and rested against a steel stop you couldn't see. Cool air rose out of the opening, damp, sharp, a smell you couldn't name, sweet, chemical, old. A steel ladder descended into darkness. You looked at Cyrus. I'll go first, he said. No. Eleanor? No. He left this for me. Whatever's down there. He left it for me. Cyrus handed you his flashlight without another word. You sat on the edge of the hatch. You swung your legs over. You found the first rung with your foot. You climbed down. 8 rungs. You counted. About 10 feet. Your shoes touched concrete. You turned on the flashlight. The beam swept across the darkness. You stopped breathing. The vault was enormous. It stretched the full length and width of the barn above. A room dug deep into the Kentucky clay, lined with poured concrete walls, ceilings reinforced with steel beams, air cool and dry. A faint hum coming from somewhere in the walls. Some kind of ventilation system that had been running for 60 years on what? You didn't know. You didn't care, because filling the space, row after row, floor to ceiling, were wooden shelving units. Hundreds of them. Each one loaded with glass bottles. Thousands of bottles. Each one sealed with wax. Each one bearing a handwritten label in your father's careful, careful hand. You walked forward. You pulled a bottle from the nearest shelf. The glass was thick, the wax seal unbroken. The label said, Bramwell Reserve, 1958, barrel 7, bottle 43. You held it up to the flashlight. The liquid inside was the color of dark amber. Perfectly clear. Whiskey. Your father had been making whiskey. Cyrus came down the ladder behind you. His flashlight joined yours. You stood side by side in the middle of a room that should not have existed, surrounded by thousands of bottles that should not have been there, breathing air your father had sealed in this room before you had your first child. Good Lord, Cyrus whispered. You walked the shelves. The bottles were organized by year. You found 1951, 1952, 1953. You followed the years like a calendar nobody had ever turned. 1958, 1962, 1965, 1968, and then it stopped. 18 years of production, then nothing. You set the bottle back on the shelf. Your hand was steady. You didn't know when it had stopped trembling. You found the workbench near the ladder. It was clean, organized, untouched by the decay that had claimed the barn above. Tools hung on pegboard walls, copper tubing, glass beakers, a set of precision hydrometers in a wooden rack, and in the center of the bench, weighed down by a heavy glass bottle, an envelope. You picked it up. The paper was yellowed, but intact, preserved by the vault's cold, dry air for 60 years. Your name was written on the front, Eleanor, in your father's handwriting. The same careful script you knew from the bottle labels, from the grocery lists he used to leave on the kitchen counter when you were a girl, from the birthday cards he sent every year until the day he died. The handwriting of a man who never wasted a word and who put pressure on every letter like he meant it. You turned the envelope over. The seal was wax, pressed with what looked like the back of a coin. You broke it. You pulled out the letter. Cyrus turned off his flashlight. He stepped back. He did the kindest thing a man can do in a moment like that. He gave you the dark. You sat on the stool at the workbench. You held the flashlight in one hand, the letter in the other. Your hands were steady. Something in you had gone very still. You began to read. Eleanor, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I owe you the truth about why I was never the father you deserved. You leaned against the workbench. I started this in 1949. The war was over. I came home to nothing. Your mother and I were living in a 2-room house with a dirt floor and a well that ran dry every August. I had 60 acres of land that wouldn't grow anything worth selling. And I had a skill I'd learned from my own father back in the mountains. I knew how to make whiskey. It was illegal. I won't pretend otherwise, but I was 26 years old, and your mother was carrying you, and I couldn't feed her on what the farm was earning. So I built a still in the woods behind the property, and I started cooking. Turns out I was good at it. Better than good. The bourbon I made was clean, smooth, aged right. Word got around. Men came from Louisville, from Lexington, from as far as Nashville, to buy what I was making. I charged premium, and I got it. By 1953, I had enough money to build this vault. I poured the foundation myself. I hired a crew from out of state to do the concrete work, men who didn't know where they were and didn't ask. I dug it by hand, Eleanor, every shovel of clay, every bucket of dirt. It took me 2 years, but when it was done, I had a room nobody knew about. Under a barn nobody cared about. On a farm nobody watched. I made whiskey for 18 years. Your mother knew. She helped with the bottling in the early days, before her health went bad. We stored everything down here, barrel-aged in white oak, bottled and sealed when it was ready. I could have sold it all. I could have lived rich. But I didn't, because in 1962, a man I trusted tried to take everything from me. You turned the page. The handwriting grew tighter, more controlled, the pressure of the pen heavier on the paper, as if your father, 60 years ago, had been trying to keep his hand from shaking. His name doesn't matter now. He was my partner, my distributor, my friend. Or so I thought. He got greedy. He wanted a bigger cut. When I said no, he threatened to turn me in. When that didn't work, he came to the farm one night with 2 men. I stood on the porch of this house with a shotgun, and I made it clear that he would never come back to this property again. I won't write the details. You don't need them. What I will tell you is this: nobody was killed that night. But a man learned that some doors stay locked for a reason. And after that night, I shut everything down. I sealed the vault. I poured concrete over the hatch, and I never touched it again. A man who shows the world everything he has is a man who's already lost it. So I showed the world nothing. I lived on what the farm made. I drove an old truck. I wore the same boots until they fell apart. And I kept this secret buried, waiting for the one person I trusted enough to find it. That person is you, Eleanor. I'm sorry I wasn't a better father. I know I was distant, distracted, always out in that barn when you needed me in the house. I was building something for you, even if I could never tell you what it was. The bottles are worth money, real money, more than the house, more than anything Bernie ever put in the bank. But promise me this, don't let anyone take it from you. The people who love your money are never the people who love you. Trust the ones who show up when you have nothing. Your father, Silas. You lowered the letter. The vault was silent, except for the faint hum of the ventilation system that had been running for 60 years for nobody, for you. You sat on the stool at the workbench. What came was not tears. It was something deeper than tears, a kind of recognition. Your father had not been a cold man. He had been a frightened one. For 60 years. Frightened of being caught, of being killed, of losing the one person he loved enough to spend his whole life protecting. You folded the letter, you put it in your coat pocket, you stood up. Cyrus, yeah, help me cover the hatch. You didn't talk on the walk back to the house. There was nothing to say yet. Cyrus made coffee. He found the percolator on the stove, and he made coffee like he had been making it in your kitchen all his life. He set a mug in front of you. He sat across the table. He looked out the window. How much do you think it's worth? He finally said. I don't know. It's a lot. I know. What are you going to do? You held the mug in both hands. The coffee was hot. The kitchen was warm. The wind moved through the bare trees outside. I'm going to find out what it's worth, you said, and then I'm going to decide. The next week was a fog. You went to the public library in town, a small one-room building with 6 computer terminals and a librarian about your age with reading glasses on a beaded chain. You spent 4 hours reading about bourbon, about vintage spirits, about auctions, about a market you had never paid attention to in your 70 years on Earth. You learned that bottles from the 1950s and 60s, if they were genuine and properly stored, could sell for hundreds of dollars each. Some for thousands, some for tens of thousands. A single bottle of pre-prohibition bourbon had sold at auction for over $100,000 the year before. You sat back in your chair. 5,000 bottles, some of them nearly 70 years old, stored in temperature-controlled conditions any collector would weep over. The librarian came to your shoulder. Find what you needed? More than I expected. She didn't ask. Small towns, they don't ask. You went to the lawyer in town. His name was on the trust documents your father had left. The original lawyer was long retired, but his son had taken over the practice. A man in his 50s. A desk piled with folders. A coffee mug that said, "World's okayest lawyer." He found your father's file in a cabinet in the back room. He spread the documents on his desk. This is an irrevocable, living trust. Meaning your father set it up in 1982. The farm, the land, all structures and contents, held in trust for your sole benefit. Sole benefit? You. Only you. Your husband never had a claim. Your children have no standing. The trust predates your marriage. It's separate property. Can they challenge it? They can try. They'd lose. What about contents? Anything within the boundaries of the trust property belongs to you. Structures, minerals, water rights, personal property left by the grantor. Your father was thorough. He was? The lawyer looked at you over his reading glasses. Mrs. Halloran? Yes. Is there something I should know? You looked at him. You didn't know him. You hadn't known him for 20 minutes. But he had been your father's son's lawyer's son. And he had watched your father's life through paperwork for 30 years before he ever met you. Yes, you said. But not today. He nodded. When you're ready. When I'm ready. The next person you needed was an expert. Cyrus made a phone call, then another phone call, then a third. That's how things work in small towns. 3 phone calls. I have a niece, he said. You have a niece. I do. Why didn't you mention this before? Wasn't relevant before. Cyrus. Eleanor. Tell me about your niece. Her name is June. She's 34. She lives in Louisville. She's a spirits appraiser, vintage bourbon. She works for an auction house and she does private consultations on the side. You stared at him. You have a niece who is a vintage bourbon appraiser. I do. In Louisville. In Louisville. And you didn't think to mention this before we broke through 6 inches of concrete. You hadn't asked about bourbon yet. You laughed, that same rusty hinge, but this time it came easier. Call her, you said. Already did. And she'll be here Friday. June Easton arrived in a small grey Honda that did not match the picture you had built of her in your head. You had pictured her as her uncle, tall, broad, quiet, boots. She was none of those things. She was small, 5'3", black hair pulled back, reading glasses pushed up on her head, a canvas bag over her shoulder that looked like it weighed more than she did. Sneakers, jeans, a blazer over a t-shirt. She got out of the car. She looked at the farmhouse. She looked at the barn. She looked at you. You're Mrs. Halloran. Eleanor. June. I know. My uncle says I'm here to see something he can't describe over the phone. He's right. She studied you. You let her. Show me, she said. You showed her. She climbed down the ladder. She stood at the bottom for a full 30 seconds. She did not move. She did not speak. You watched her from the workbench, where you had set up 2 folding chairs and a battery-powered lamp running on an extension cord up through the hatch. When she finally turned, her eyes were wet. A 34-year-old woman in a blazer, standing in a vault under a barn in Hollow Creek, Kentucky, crying without making a sound. Mrs. Halloran. Eleanor. Eleanor. Who made this? My father. Your father. Silas Bramwell. He passed away 22 years ago. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. Your father was a master. You didn't know what to say to that, so you said nothing. She walked the shelves slowly. She pulled bottles at random. She examined labels. She held them up to the lamp. She used a small flashlight to study the liquid inside. She made notes on a clipboard. She asked you questions you didn't know the answers to. She made more notes. She did not speak for almost an hour. When she finished, she sat down in the second folding chair. She set her clipboard on her knee. I can't give you an exact number without full testing, authentication, chemical analysis, provenance documentation. There is going to be a lot of paperwork. I understand. But based on what I'm seeing here, based on the volume, the age, the condition, the aging technique, the seal integrity. She paused. You're looking at a collection worth somewhere between $12 and $18 million. The number sat in the air. You did not react. You had expected something large. Hearing it said aloud was different. 12 to $18 million. Your father, who had driven the same truck for 30 years, who had patched his boots with shoe goo because he wouldn't pay $40 for new ones, had been sitting on a fortune for 60 years, and the only thing he had ever asked was that you find it. "What do you recommend?" you said. June leaned forward. "Don't flood the market. A collection this size released all at once would crash the price. You want to sell in small batches, 100 bottles at a time, through private buyers and select auction houses. At that pace, with proper marketing, you could stretch this over 5 to 10 years and maximize the return. And if I needed money now, quickly, she thought, I could connect you with 2 or 3 private collectors who would buy 100 bottles tomorrow. Pre-authentication. Based on my preliminary assessment, you'd see somewhere around 480,000 for the first batch." You nodded. "Do it." Things began to happen. Not all at once, but fast enough. June left with 10 bottles for laboratory testing. 3 weeks later, she came back with results and 3 buyer names. The wire transfers happened on a Tuesday. By Wednesday afternoon, Eleanor Halloran had $472,000 in a checking account at the First Bank of Millbrook. The bank teller, a young woman named Sherry, processed the deposit and looked up at you with eyes the size of saucers. "Ma'am, yes, this is a lot of money. I know. Is everything okay?" You looked at her. This girl, this stranger, this 25-year-old who had probably never had more than $1,000 in any account in her life, asking you, sweetly, with real concern, if you were okay. "Yes," you said. "I'm okay." You paid the $11,000 in back taxes that afternoon, with a cashier's check. You also paid the next year's assessment in advance. You hired a roofer to patch the house. You called a plumber. You bought a used Chevy truck off a lot in town. 10 years old, rust on the fenders, solid engine. $3,000. You opened a small savings account. You moved most of the money into it. Cyrus helped you fix the fence along the road. He cleared the driveway with a tractor he had not previously mentioned owning. "How many tractors do you have, Cyrus?" Two. Eleanor: "Yes, I have a lot of equipment." You laughed. "Easier this time, easier every time." June kept coming back. That surprised you. She came on weekends. She drove down from Louisville on Friday nights. She slept on the fold-out couch in the living room. She walked the property with her hands in her pockets. She helped you organize the records of which bottles had been sold. She helped you set up a spreadsheet on a laptop she insisted you needed. You didn't ask why she kept coming back, but you noticed. And one Saturday morning, while you were standing at the kitchen counter making pancakes, you watched her sit at your kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a coffee mug. Her hair down. No glasses, no blazer. Just a young woman in a sweatshirt, staring out a window at a landscape she had no reason to love. She caught you looking. "What?" "Nothing." "Eleanor." "It's nothing, June." She set the mug down. "My mother left when I was 8. You waited. My dad raised me. He did the best he could, but he wasn't built for it. Cyrus helped a lot. My uncle, he'd come up to Louisville every other weekend, sit in the kitchen, help me with my homework. He's the reason I made it through high school." "I see. I never had a grandmother, Eleanor. Both of mine were gone before I was born." You set down the spatula. You didn't know what to do with your hands. "I'm not your grandmother, June." "I know. I'm not. I know that, Eleanor. I'm not asking you to be. All right. I just, she looked down at the mug. I just like coming here. You stood at the kitchen counter. You looked at her. This 34-year-old woman who had appraised your father's life's work and then kept driving back every weekend for nothing, for coffee in your kitchen. Then keep coming, you said. She smiled. You smiled. You went back to the pancakes, and neither of you said anything else about it. You did not call your children. You did not call Russell. You did not call Lorraine. For the first time in 50 years, you did not feel the need to report your whereabouts, to explain your decisions, to justify your existence. But silence, from a woman who used to be dependent, is louder than any phone call. Lorraine noticed first. She called your old number, the one Russell had cancelled the day after you got on the bus. She called Russell. Russell hadn't heard from you either. They checked the assisted living facilities Lorraine had researched. You had never applied to any of them. A month went by, then two. Then, on a Saturday in late November, a rental car came up your driveway. You saw it from the kitchen window. You set down your dish towel. You walked out onto the porch. Lorraine, in a wool coat, in heels, picking her way up the gravel path like the ground might bite her. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. She looked up at the house. Mom, Lorraine, you painted it. Just the front. Cyrus is helping me do the sides next week. Who's Cyrus? A neighbor. She climbed the steps. She stood in front of you. She was trying to read your face, looking for confusion, for vulnerability, for some sign that this was a mistake she could fix. Mom. Yes. This isn't safe. I'm fine. You're alone in the middle of nowhere with no support system. What if you fall? What if you get sick? I've been here 2 months. I've fixed the house. I've paid the taxes. I've bought a truck. Mom, what if I do fall, Lorraine? Then I'll handle it, the way I've handled everything for 50 years. She didn't have a response. You watched her eyes move to the barn. You felt something cold drop in your stomach. What's in there? She said. Tools. Old hay. Dad always said Grandpa Silas's barn was locked. I opened it. With what? A claw hammer. She studied you. You studied her. You had taught 7th graders for 35 years. You could outlast a 44-year-old real estate agent in a staring contest. She left after an hour. She accepted coffee. She declined lunch. She asked 7 questions about money that you did not answer. She hugged you at the car. Quickly. Lightly. Like the hug itself might be evidence. You watched her drive away. Then you walked inside. You picked up the phone. You called Cyrus. Lorraine was here. How bad? She saw the truck, the new paint, the fencing. What do you think she'll do? She'll tell Russell. And what will Russell do? He'll do what he always does. He'll try to take control. There was a pause on the line. Cyrus, in his careful mining engineer way, considered his words. Eleanor. Yes. You're going to need a lawyer who knows how to fight. I have one. You're going to need a doctor who can vouch for you. I'll call mine in Columbus. You're going to need every receipt, every transaction, every piece of paper that shows you've been making competent decisions for the past 3 months. I have those too. Then we'll be ready. We. The word landed in your chest and stayed there. He had said we. Like this was both of you. Like you were not alone in this. You hadn't been called we in months. You closed your eyes. Thank you, Cyrus. Don't thank me yet. Russell moved fast. Within a week, he had pulled the property records from the county assessor's office. He had found the trust. He had found the paid tax receipts. He had called the bank in Millbrook. They wouldn't tell him anything. He had called the lawyer's office. They wouldn't tell him anything. Russell understood paperwork. He understood contracts. He understood liability. He also understood when something didn't add up. His mother had arrived in Kentucky with $47. Now she owned a functioning property, a truck, a bank account. Either she had found resources he didn't know about, or someone was taking advantage of her. He chose the second interpretation. It was easier. It made him the hero, instead of the man who had put his own mother on a Greyhound bus. The court papers arrived on a Monday afternoon in December. A process server, a man in a windbreaker, drove up the driveway, handed you an envelope, drove away without a word. You stood on the porch and read them. Your son and your daughter were petitioning the county court to declare you mentally incompetent, to appoint Russell as conservator of your person and estate, including all trust property. The petition cited your age, your sudden and unexplained relocation to an isolated rural property, your apparent confusion regarding financial matters, and your vulnerability to exploitation by unknown third parties. It listed two of those parties: Cyrus Easton, age 72, a neighbor with no familial relationship who has been observed providing labor and access to the property; June Easton, age 34, a young woman from Louisville with professional ties to the spirits industry who has been observed making frequent overnight visits. You read the paragraph twice. Then you laughed, out loud, a real laugh, not rusty anymore, a laugh with edges, with teeth, a 72-year-old retired mining engineer and a 34-year-old woman who appraised bottles. That was the conspiracy. That was the threat. You folded the papers. You walked inside. You sat at the kitchen table. You weren't scared. You weren't hurt. Those feelings had burned out weeks ago, in Russell's guest bedroom, in the back of a Greyhound bus, in the first cold nights on this farm, when you had nothing and nobody. What you felt now was clarity. Your children had taken everything you had shared willingly. Now they were coming for the one thing you hadn't. You picked up the phone. You called Cyrus. They filed. How soon? 3 weeks, January 9th. A pause. Eleanor. Yes. What do you need? You looked out the kitchen window, at the barn, at the field beyond, at the road that ran past the mailbox, at the gravel driveway, where, 2 months ago, a 70-year-old woman with $47 in her purse had stood holding her father's pocket watch. You thought about your father, the man who had been afraid for 60 years, who had built a vault under a barn rather than show the world what he had, who had loaned $1,200 to a stranger and made him swear not to tell. You thought about the 4 numbers on the back of the watch. You thought about how long he had waited for you to find them. You thought about how he would have handled this if he were here, sitting at this kitchen table, holding a court summons. He would have been afraid. You weren't afraid. That was the difference between you and him. Cyrus, you said, yes. I need you to come over. On my way. You hung up the phone. You stood at the kitchen window. You watched the road, and underneath you, under the barn, under 60 years of concrete and silence, 5,000 bottles of your father's life's work waited for what came next. Cyrus came at dusk. He brought a casserole his late wife's recipe card had taught him to make. Chicken and rice, still warm, still wrapped in the same tin foil his wife had used, because Cyrus did not believe in throwing away tin foil. He set it on the table. He sat across from you. He did not ask if you were okay, because he could see that you weren't, and because asking that question of a woman like you was an insult. 3 weeks, he said. 3 weeks. What do you need first? A doctor. You have one. In Columbus. I trust her. 15 years. Then we drive to Columbus. We. You looked at him. This man, 2 miles down the road, whom you had known for 68 days, who had said we twice now, when your own son hadn't said it once in 15 years. The drive to Columbus was 4 hours. Cyrus drove. You sat in the passenger seat. You held the pocket watch in your lap. You did not speak much. You stopped at a gas station outside Cincinnati. Cyrus pumped the gas. You went inside for coffee. The cashier, a woman about your age, looked at you with the kind of look only women your age recognize. Just coffee, you said. 2 coffees, Cyrus said behind you, walking up. She looked at the 2 of you. She made an assumption. Anniversary trip? You laughed. You actually laughed. No, ma'am, Cyrus said. Lawyering. She didn't know what to do with that. You paid. You walked out. The bell over the door jingled behind you. Lawyering, you said. Best I could come up with on short notice. Cyrus. Yes. You're a strange man. I know. Dr. Linda Park had been your doctor for 15 years. She was 61, sharp eyes, the kind of doctor who looked you in the face and not at her clipboard. She had seen you through Bernie's 2 heart episodes, through your knee surgery, through the year your blood pressure spiked when Russell had announced he was running the agency his own way. She knew you. You sat in her office. You told her everything. She listened. She did not interrupt. She did not write notes during the parts that mattered. When you finished, she was quiet for a moment. Eleanor. Yes. Your son is filing for conservatorship. Yes. On the grounds of mental incompetence. Yes. Your son. Yes. She closed her file. I'd like to run the full cognitive battery. Mini-mental, MoCA, trail-making, verbal fluency, the whole thing. 2 hours. I want everything documented, with my name on it, with my license number on it. All right. I also want a colleague to administer parts of it. Independent verification. A neuropsychologist I trust at Ohio State. We'll get a second signature. Linda? Yes. Why? She looked at you for a long moment. Because I have been watching this happen to women in my practice for 30 years. I have signed sympathy cards for women whose children buried them in nursing homes, and I am tired of it. So we are going to bury this petition, and we are going to use every credential I have to do it. You couldn't speak. You nodded. She smiled. Once, tight, professional, but real. Now hold out your arm. I'm checking your blood pressure first. The testing took 3 days. You stayed in a hotel near the medical center. Cyrus stayed in the room next door. He brought you breakfast every morning from the diner across the street. Eggs over easy, wheat toast. No butter on the toast because you didn't like butter on your toast, and he had figured that out somehow without ever asking. You scored in the 95th percentile for your age. The neuropsychologist, a man in his 50s, with a beard and a wedding ring he twisted constantly, looked at the results and shook his head. Mrs. Halloran, yes, I administer this test on average 8 times a week. All right. I have not seen a score this high in a 70-year-old in 2 years. All right. I am going to write you the strongest cognitive endorsement I have ever written, and I will testify under oath if your son's attorney has the courage to put me on a stand. You stared at him. You had not expected this anger, from a stranger. Thank you, you said. He twisted his ring. Have your lawyer call me. We'll coordinate. All right. You left his office. In the hallway, Cyrus was sitting in a plastic chair, reading a magazine about fishing. He looked up. Well, 95th percentile. He set the magazine down very carefully. He looked at the floor for a moment. Then he looked back up. Eleanor, yes. Your father would be proud. That one almost broke you. You drove back to Kentucky on Tuesday night. It rained for 200 miles. Cyrus drove with both hands on the wheel. The radio was off. The wipers were the only sound. Somewhere outside Cincinnati you said, "He didn't drive me to the bus station." Who didn't? Russell. He let me go alone. I had a suitcase. I asked him to call a cab, and he did. But he didn't drive me. Cyrus didn't answer for a long moment. Eleanor, yes. That's not your fault. I know. That is his. I know. You watch the wipers. Back, forth, back, forth. I keep thinking I should have known. Known what? That he would do this. To me, eventually. You couldn't have known. I should have. Eleanor, stop. You stopped. He drove. The wipers kept going. After a while, you said very quietly, "I miss Bernie." I know you do. He wouldn't have let this happen. No, he wouldn't. He'd be furious. He should be. A pause. Eleanor, yes, Bernie's not here. So you are going to handle this without him. And I think he'd be more proud of you than he ever was in all those 50 years. You looked out the window, at the rain, at the dark. You did not answer. You couldn't. You came home to a casserole on the porch, wrapped in tin foil, from a neighbor you had never met, with a note that said, "Heard you been busy. Wanted to make sure you ate." That was Hollow Creek. You had been there 10 weeks, and the women had decided you were one of theirs. You ate the casserole standing at the kitchen counter. You called June. "I need a second sale." How fast? Before January 9th. How much? As much as you can move, quickly, through clean channels. Why? I want every transaction in the bank account before the hearing. I want a paper trail so thick they could choke on it. Eleanor, yes. You realize what you are asking. I do. All right, 200 bottles, the 1951 and 1952 vintages. They are the rarest. They will move fastest. I have 3 buyers I have already cleared. Do it. Done. She hung up. By the end of that week, $490,000 had been wired to your account. You paid the property taxes for the next 5 years, in advance. You set up a $50,000 repair fund. You bought a small wood stove for the kitchen because Cyrus had mentioned that the gas furnace probably wouldn't make it through January. Every single transaction. Documented. Receipts in a manila folder. Lined up, in order, like soldiers. 3 days before the hearing, Lorraine called. You were in the kitchen. The phone rang. You looked at the caller ID. You let it ring 4 times, then you picked up. "Hello? Mom? Lorraine? Are you doing okay?" "I'm fine. A pause. "I just wanted to call." "Lorraine?" "Yes. You're calling to find out what I'm going to say at the hearing." A long, long silence. "No, Mom, that's not." "Don't. Don't lie to me, Lorraine. Not now. Not over this." Another silence. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Smaller, younger. Somewhere in the back of it, you could hear the 8-year-old who used to climb into your lap with a book at bedtime. "I told Russell not to file." "Did you?" "I did. I told him the doctor thing was crazy. I told him that you never. But you signed the petition." "Yes." "You signed it, Lorraine?" "Yes." You did not yell. You let the silence sit, the way a teacher lets silence sit, with a student who has done something wrong and needs to feel it. Mom, yes, I'm scared. Of what? Of who I've become. You closed your eyes. This was the thing you had been waiting to hear. For weeks, for months, for most of her adult life. And it landed strangely. Not with relief, not with vindication, just with a kind of quiet. Then come to the hearing, you said. Mum, come to the hearing, Lorraine. Sit on Russell's side, where you signed, and see what it feels like. I can't. You can. You will. Because you owe me that much, Lorraine. After everything, you owe me that much. She didn't answer. You hung up. You stood at the kitchen counter, both hands flat on the laminate. There was no time for anything else. The morning of the hearing, you put on a grey wool dress. You had bought it in town, from a shop run by a woman named Edna, who had measured you for it personally and refused to take more than $30. You put on stockings. You put on the only good pair of shoes you had brought with you on the bus from Ohio. You pinned the pocket watch to your lapel. You looked at yourself in the bathroom mirror. A 70-year-old woman. Grey hair. Lined face. Steady eyes. You did not look like a confused widow. You did not look like a vulnerable target. You looked like a woman who had walked 4 miles with a suitcase in the cold and had not stopped walking since. Cyrus drove you to the courthouse. He was wearing a tie. You had never seen him in a tie. Cyrus, don't. You look nice. Don't. You smiled. He kept driving. The courthouse was small. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, the kind of buzz fluorescent lights make in government buildings everywhere in America. Russell sat on the left side, with his attorney, a sharp-looking man in a dark suit, a leather briefcase. Lorraine sat next to Russell. She was crying. Not performance crying, not funeral crying. Actual crying. The kind that ruins your makeup. You did not look at her. You sat on the right side, with your lawyer, the 50-something man with the world's okayest lawyer mug, who today had on a perfectly pressed suit, who today did not look like the world's okayest lawyer at all. You set the manila folder on the table in front of you. The judge entered. A woman, 60s, silver hair, reading glasses, the kind of judge who had seen everything and was not going to be impressed. She read the petition silently. She asked a few procedural questions. She turned to Russell's attorney. Counselor, you have filed a petition for conservatorship on grounds of mental incompetence. What evidence are you presenting today? He stood. Your Honor, Mrs. Halloran is a 70-year-old widow who, following the death of her husband, abandoned her family home and relocated to an isolated, dilapidated rural property. She has since engaged in significant financial transactions, the source of which her family cannot identify. We believe she is being influenced or exploited by unknown parties. Unknown parties, you're filing names, 2 of them. A pause. Yes, Your Honor. Have you presented medical evidence? Your Honor, have you presented medical evidence? We have not yet completed. You have not. Your Honor, we believe. What you believe is not evidence, Counselor. She turned to your lawyer. Counselor for the respondent. He stood. Your Honor, I would like to enter the following into the record. He began. He set them on his table, one by one. A signed cognitive evaluation from Dr. Linda Park. Internist, 15-year treating physician. A signed second cognitive evaluation from Dr. Michael Reston. Neuropsychologist, Ohio State University. Score, 95th percentile. A statement from Dr. Reston offering to testify under oath that the petition is medically baseless and constitutes a misuse of the court system. The full trust documents from 1982, establishing the property as separate, predating the marriage. Tax receipts, $11,000 in back taxes, paid in full, plus 5 years prepaid. Bank statements, every transaction, documented, with matching receipts, property repair invoices, truck purchase, groceries. A timeline of every decision the respondent had made since arriving on the property, presented in chronological order, cross-referenced, color-coded. The judge read. She read for a long time. Russell's attorney shifted in his seat. Once, twice. Russell did not move. He stared at the table in front of him. Lorraine wiped her face. The judge looked up. Counselor for the petitioner. Yes, Your Honor. Do you have any medical evidence? No, Your Honor. Any treating physician statement? No, Your Honor. Any independent evaluation? No, Your Honor. Anything beyond your client's personal concerns? A long pause. No, Your Honor. The judge took off her reading glasses. She looked at Russell. Mr. Halloran. Russell looked up. Mr. Halloran, I am going to be direct, because I think you need to hear this directly. Are you listening? Yes, Your Honor. This petition has no medical basis. None. The respondent has demonstrated clear, consistent, and competent management of her affairs. She has produced documentation that, frankly, I wish I saw from petitioners, half as often as I should. She paused. I am dismissing this petition. A beat. I am also going to note, for the record, that filing a conservatorship petition without any medical evidence wastes this court's time, causes significant emotional harm to the respondent, and, in my opinion, comes very close to elder abuse. Russell flinched. Mr. Halloran, I would encourage you to examine your conscience before filing again. She banged the gavel. Dismissed. You did not move. For a long moment, you sat in your chair and you breathed. In, out. Your lawyer leaned over. Eleanor, yes. You won. I know. You won. I heard you. He laughed, quietly. The way men laugh when they have been holding something in for an hour. You stood up. You picked up the manila folder. You walked out of the courtroom. Russell did not look at you. Lorraine did. She stood up. As you passed, you did not stop. In the hallway, Russell caught up. You were walking toward the front doors. The winter light was coming through the tall courthouse windows. Cyrus was waiting outside. You could see him through the glass. Mom, you did not stop. Mom, you stopped. You turned. Russell stood in front of you, a 47-year-old man in a charcoal suit, a boy with his father's jaw and your eyes, a man who had taken everything you had built and had still wanted more. His face was red. What did you find? You looked at him. What? On that farm, what did you find? What did Grandpa Silas leave you? Russell, tell me. Russell, I'm your son. I have a right to know. You stood very still. You had thought, in the long nights leading up to this, about what you would say. To him. If he asked, you had rehearsed it. You had drafted it. You had whispered it into the dark. Now, standing in this hallway, none of those words came. What came instead was the truth, the shorter, harder version. You took what you could carry, Russell. You just couldn't carry what mattered. His face changed. For 1 second. Just one. A boy. A real boy. 12 years old. Caught lying about the cookie jar. About the broken vase. About the report card he had hidden in the drawer. And then, gone. The man was back. The lawyer was back. The pride was back. "You'll regret this," he said. "No, Russell. You will." "I won't." "Mom, you will, Russell. You will regret this, but not because of me." You turned. You walked away. He did not follow. Lorraine was waiting at the front doors. She had not gone outside. Her makeup was ruined. Her eyes were red. Her hands were shaking. "Mom, Lorraine, I'm sorry. I know. I'm so sorry. I know you are. I knew it was wrong." "You did? The whole time?" "Lorraine, yes. Stop apologizing to me. I am not the one you need to forgive yourself for." "You are." She nodded. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, like a child. "I want to come back," she said. "To the farm. To you. I want. When you are ready to come back as my daughter, not as someone looking for what I have, as my daughter, then come." "How will I know?" "You'll know." You hugged her. You did not plan to, but you did. She held on. For longer than she had held on to you in 20 years. You let her. Cyrus drove you home. You did not speak for a long time. The hills rolled past, the bare trees, the early December light, a hawk circling somewhere over a field, the road and the light that you had been driving past for 2 months and that had begun, somehow, to feel like home. Halfway back, you said, "Cyrus." "Yes." "Take me to the storefront." "Which storefront?" "The empty one on Main Street, the old pharmacy with the broken sign." "Eleanor, just take me." He took you. The storefront sat at the end of Main Street. A small brick building, 2 stories, boarded windows, a faded sign that had once said Wilson Drug and now said only Will's Doctor. You stood on the sidewalk, in your grey wool dress, in the cold December afternoon. Cyrus stood beside you. "What are you thinking?" "I am thinking." "What?" "That I have $12 to $18 million, and a life I did not choose, and a court file that proves nothing is wrong with my mind, and I am 70 years old, and I do not want to wait." "For what?" You looked at him. "For a reason to still be here." He was quiet. "What did you have in mind?" "A place. For people. Like me. Women. Mostly. Women whose children took everything. Who don't know who to call. Who don't know their rights. Who think they have nothing left because somebody told them they had nothing left. A non-profit. A help center. Small. Free. With a lawyer who knows trusts. With a social worker who knows the system. With somebody behind a desk who can pour them a cup of coffee and listen. "Eleanor?" "Yes." "That's a lot of work." "I know." "You're 70. I know." He looked at the storefront. 68,000, he said. "What?" "That's what they're asking." I checked. You checked. I checked, Eleanor. "When?" "Last week." "Cyrus." "What?" "Why?" He did not answer for a long moment. The wind moved down Main Street. "Because I knew." "Knew what?" "Knew you'd ask." You looked at him. You did not say anything, but you took his hand, for 1 second, just one, in the middle of Main Street, in Hollow Creek, Kentucky, on the afternoon you won. You bought the storefront in February. You named it the Bramwell Center, for your father, because Silas Bramwell had spent his whole life building something to protect the one person he loved, and you wanted to do the same thing, just for more people. The center opened quietly. No ribbon cutting, no press release. Just a door that was open and a woman behind a desk who knew what it felt like to lose everything. A retired attorney came on retainer. His name was Walt Briggs. He had been practicing 38 years. He took the position for half what you offered him because he said, I've watched too many of these go the wrong way. A social worker came 2 days a week, named Patty, mid-50s, glasses, the kind of laugh that made strangers comfortable. Cyrus volunteered Tuesdays and Thursdays. He helped with intake paperwork. He drove people to appointments. He did not talk about why he did it. He just showed up. June drove down on weekends. She organized your business records. She ran the whiskey sales. She set up the books for the non-profit. She started calling you Nellie somewhere around the third weekend in March, and you did not correct her because nobody had called you Nellie since your mother died. Within a month, you were seeing 12 to 15 people a week. Widows whose sons had quietly transferred deeds. Veterans who couldn't navigate the benefits system. A 73-year-old man whose daughter had sold his house out from under him while he was hospitalized. A 66-year-old woman who had been told she had to choose between the dog and the assisted living place, and had been about to choose the assisted living place, until somebody at the diner mentioned the Bramwell Center. You did not counsel them. You weren't trained for that. But you opened the door every morning. You poured the coffee. You sat across from them. And you listened. And every time, every single time, a woman sat down across from you and said, "I don't know what to do." You said back 2 words. The same 2 words a stranger had said to you in a gas station on the day you arrived. Welcome home. In April, on a Thursday afternoon, an envelope appeared in the mailbox at the farm. White, plain, no address, no stamp. You stood at the mailbox. You stared at it. Then you opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded once, in shaky handwriting. I sent you the first $300 in November. I should have signed it then. I'm sorry. I was the one who saw you walking on the road that day with your suitcase. I knew Silas. I owed him. I owe him still. Cyrus. You stood at the mailbox. You put the note back in the envelope. You put the envelope in your coat pocket. You walked back up the driveway. Cyrus was on the porch, fixing a hinge on the screen door. He looked up. Mail. Mail. He looked at your face. He looked back at the door. You read it. I read it. He kept working on the hinge. You climbed the porch steps. You sat in the rocking chair. You watched him fix the screen door for a long time. Then you said, "Cyrus." "Yes, thank you." He did not look at you, but the muscles in his shoulders softened, the way a man's shoulders soften only when something inside him has been put down after carrying it too long. In May, Lorraine called. "Mom?" "Yes. I want to come for the weekend. Can I?" "Just you." "Just me." "All right. Friday." She came on a Friday evening in a car that was not the Mercedes Russell had given her 3 years ago and that you had paid for, half of, without ever knowing it. She came with a duffel bag. No lawyer, no agenda, no husband, no children, just her. In jeans and a sweatshirt, looking for the first time in maybe 10 years like a woman who had not put on a face that morning. She got out of the car. She looked at the farm. "Mom." "Lorraine." "It's beautiful." "It is." She came up the steps. She stood in front of you. She said the same thing she had said in the courthouse hallway. "I'm sorry." You said the same thing back. "I know." But this time, you added something. "Come inside, baby." She broke. Right there. On the porch. You held her. You held her for as long as she needed, which was a long time. You sat on the porch that night, the 2 of you, with cups of coffee, the air thick with the smell of honeysuckle, the crickets loud, the sky enormous. She told you about her marriage, which was not good, about her work, which was empty, about the nights she lay awake and thought about who she had become. You did not interrupt. You did not give advice. You just listened. The way Cyrus had listened to you. The way the women in town listened to each other. When she finished, she said, "Mom?" "Yes." "What's actually in the barn?" You smiled. "Come back next weekend. I'll show you." She laughed. Through tears. Real tears. The kind that don't ruin makeup because she wasn't wearing any. Then she said, "Russell isn't coming. Ever, is he?" You looked out at the dark. You thought about him. Your son. 47. Charcoal suits. Legal pads. The boy you had read bedtime stories to. Who had stopped being that boy somewhere along the way and was probably, right now, in his office in Columbus, drafting some other paper that would hurt some other person. "I don't know," you said, "but the door is open. It will always be open. He just has to walk through it." Will he? Probably not. "Mom?" "Yes." "That's hard." "I know it is." You took her hand. She held on. In late May, you stood at the back of the property, where the land sloped down toward a creek you had discovered in January. Frozen then, running clear now, spring water, cold and steady. You stood there. You looked back at the farm. The whole thing. The white farmhouse with new paint on all four sides. The cedar porch Cyrus had milled himself. The vegetable garden you and Lorraine had planted last weekend. The barn with its new roof. The fields stretching flat and green in every direction. This place your children had laughed about. This ruin they had dumped on you because it was the only thing worth nothing. You pulled the pocket watch out of your jacket pocket. You turned it over. 4 numbers, scratched into the brass. 60 years ago. By a man who could not say, "I love you," who could not say, "I am proud of you," who could not say, "I am sorry, I was distant. I am sorry, I was afraid. I am sorry, I built this in the dark," but who could scratch 4 numbers into a watch and press it into the hand of a 48-year-old daughter and whisper, "You'll know." You ran your thumb across them. "Daddy." You said it out loud, to the wind, to the field, to the creek, to the man who had been gone 22 years. "I know now, Daddy." You closed your hand around the watch. You held it tight. The wind moved through the tall grass. The sun was warm on your face. Somewhere up at the house, you could hear Lorraine and June laughing in the kitchen. Cyrus was walking up the path with 2 grocery bags. He saw you. He raised one hand. You raised one back. You started walking up the slope, toward the farmhouse, toward the porch, toward the kitchen, where your daughter was learning to make biscuits from a recipe card written in your mother's hand, toward a life you had not chosen, but that you had built, brick by brick, receipt by receipt, door by door, out of $47, and the 4 numbers on the back of a brass pocket watch, and the unwillingness, finally, at 70 years old, to disappear. You were home. You had always been home. You just hadn't known it.